So Joe Biden uh, took a trip. God bless him. Every time I wanna criticize this guy, he does something to make me happy. Again, this slips. Joe Biden took a trip to Kiev to visit with and speak with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. This is huge. This is a show of solidarity between countries that I think needed to happen in some form, and I'm impressed that it took this one. The reason being, Putin needs to understand that the U.S. is going to stand strong with Ukraine. However, I don't want to make this out necessarily to mean that all is going to be well forever. We still have an election coming up, and that is going to have dire consequences for the people. Well, it's going to have serious consequences for the people in Ukraine, no matter how it goes. It's either going to be very good or very bad for Ukraine. We need to hope that with the, God help us, House and Senate and presidency that we have in place right now, the political will is there to keep supporting Ukraine, at least through 2024, at which point, let's hope we can take the House back. Let's hope we can get, again, a situation where we have a Democratic House, Senate, and presidency. If that happens, oh boy, I think Russia is done for in Ukraine. If that doesn't happen, dire times. But a great sign that Russia is not going to have an easy time of things from now until 2024 at least, is that Joe Biden just visited Ukraine in person. Here's Morning Joe talking about it.
Contributing writer at The Atlantic, Elliot Cohen, writes about President Biden's historic visit to Ukraine in a new piece for the magazine titled, "Biden Just Destroyed Putin's Last Hope." In it, Cohen writes, quote, "Symbols matter. A Kennedy or a Reagan at the Berlin Wall, a Churchill with a cigar and a bowler. For that matter, a green-clad Zelenskyy growling, 'I need ammunition, not a ride.' Simply by taking the hazardous trip to Kiev, Biden made a strategic move of cardinal importance. While the president clearly intended to bolster the confidence of Ukraine and the commitment of ambivalent Europeans and neo-isolationist Americans, his real audiences lay elsewhere. As his remarks about Western strength indicated, Russia has cycled through a series of theories of victory in Ukraine. It's been reduced to one last hope, that Vladimir Putin's will is stronger than Joe Biden's. And Biden just said by deed as well as word, oh, no, it's not. That is a gut punch to Russia's leader. The Russians received word of the trip. We're informed, and presumably the threat stated or implied, that they would get a violent and overwhelming response if they attempted to interfere with it. And
okay, let me just So first of all, first line, last line, or yeah, let's just talk about that whole piece. The Russians received word of the trip, that they would get okay. So what he said in the beginning, that it's essentially whose will is stronger. Yeah, that's another way of saying leading up to 2024, how much resistance or how much help is Ukraine going to get from the United States? How much resistance in terms of military hardware, in terms of former U.S. Special Forces heading on over to Ukraine to help fight in the territorial defense of Ukraine, is going to happen. It appears that Joe Biden is saying, buddy, we're in this for real. We are fully supporting Ukraine. That's excellent. Further, let me just be clear about that last line. Implied that they would get a violent and overwhelming response if they attempted to interfere with it. As in, look, over in Eastern Europe, Russia might be, if this was a prison, say, Russia's in the minimum security one, and for whatever reason, the U.S. is visiting from their prison, and in the current building, Russia might be the scariest con artist currently imprisoned. U.S. is the scariest murderer. Don't F with the U.S. Look, I'm not usually happy about U.S. military might. I think it represents a loss of opportunity in so many other things we could have been doing with our time and resources. I think we were able to donate all the tanks we donated because they were collecting dust, because we just have so many GD things. Okay. Setting aside that, the fact is we do have. The fact is we are the only nation who has used a nuke before. Folks, don't even play. If the president says he's going somewhere and he means it, he's going there. That's how she works. It would have been hilarious and destructive for Russia if they would have attempted to interfere. Of course, they wouldn't have. They just, even as a matter of politics, they wouldn't have, just because of how it would nettle NATO feathers. They wouldn't have. But it's just funny to me that they're like, and just so you know, we're still the U.S. effing A. Come on.
Quote. Join us now, staff writer at The Atlantic, Tom Nichols, and former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations, Hagar Shamali. She also worked at the NSC and the Treasury Department. Good morning to you both. Hagar, I'll start with you. The significance of seeing the President of the United States walk through the streets of Kiev with President Zelenskyy yesterday is what?
Oh, first, the logistical feat that it takes for the White House, the military, the Secret Service to get the U.S. president to a war zone where there is no U.S. military presence is very significant. But the fact that they had it now a year later, right before the year anniversary, and you have Biden there hugging.
And I do just want to say, oh, hell yeah, look at that. That's a hell of an image. Yeah, no U.S. military presence there. If they couldn't get him there, because I do wonder if there would have become a U.S. military presence. Like, yeah, we're just putting this effing fleet here in place because we wanted to say hi and somebody dared say that we couldn't. So, we just killed every living thing that that had a fur hat on for a 10-mile radius, and then we landed and did whatever the hell we want. I'm sorry, the idea is humorous to me.
President Zelenskyy saying that the U.S. support will endure and will be here. What he's saying is that we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here until you defeat Russia. But also, when you couple that with the military support, he now announced an additional $500 million in military aid, additional sanctions. What he's trying to say is, we're going to be here for you, but also we want to get to the end of this as quickly as possible. It's very symbolic, very impressive.
And Joe, we've been talking this morning about some of the details of this trip, completely in secret, a small group.
Okay, this is pure speculation, but I do really want to focus in on this point because Joe Biden has historically been quite a centrist, but he has shown that he is willing to deal with reality from time to time. When he says, but we want to get to an end of this as quickly as possible, I realize that they're couching that as if saying, like, we don't want to spend American dollars on military stuff forever and ever. Another way to look at that would be him saying, no. I heard what Clinton said too. She's not presently involved in this. Please and thank you. We are looking to boot Russia out just like you are. Obviously, that's not true. There's been debate over whether or not we're going to be committed all the way through retaking Crimea, which I want to stress. Crimea is if we said retaking Florida, if we were trying to retake the United States from an invader. it's not a separate part of Ukraine. Crimea is just a region in Ukraine, like the Donbass is. These are just regions of Ukraine. Like if we said the Midwest, that's what people are saying when they say the Donbass. So I hope that was him saying to Zelenskyy, this is our commitment. We're here with you. I just can't say that I know that's what, that I'm not reading too much into that. I can't promise that.
A group of people at the White House
that
knew
might
what was
be wishful
happening.
thinking on my
weeks
part.
and really months in the making. The president wanted to make this trip as he watched other world leaders walk through the streets of Kiev with Zelenskyy. There was a plane that was not the usual Air Force One that took him. There was a long train ride from Poland into Kiev. There was a motorcade with no sirens or lights on to get him in quietly. And then the images we just saw there of him walking confidently through the streets of Kiev with President Zelenskyy.
Just a remarkable journey for Joe Biden. I mean, you read a recounting of it in the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. It reads like a movie script. All of the diversions, all of the things that he had to do to get to Kyiv and shake the hands of President Zelenskyy and walk around Zelenskyy and show the people of Ukraine his support for him. Tom Nichols, it's probably hard for us to actually be able to put into words just what that meant, not only to President Zelenskyy, but more importantly to the people.
Hey, real quick, every time you hear some right-wing stooge doesn't really know anything about foreign politics. Anytime you hear, God help us, somebody on the left be a useful idiot for Russia because they cannot separate the idea of socialism and communism and what the Soviet Union was, which was truly none of those things. If you run into one of those people, remember that wall right there. People are dying. People are getting killed because of Putin's ambition. People are dead right now because of that. And they are dying every day because of that. Want to know why I am so in favor of the U.S. helping in any way it can and ending this thing as fast as it can? It's because Ukraine is being invaded. The sovereign country, it is being invaded for no damn reason. And people are dying because of it. You have kids fighting for their country and for their lives and for their families' lives. You have hospitals full of pregnant women getting shelled. Civilians dying left and right. And the military folks who are dying shouldn't have to be fighting to begin with, because this war is simply for Putin's ambition. F that guy. And good on Joe Biden for this visit.
People of that war-torn country.
And to the world. This was, a president of the United States doing something that the Secret Service didn't want him to do, that people didn't expect him to do, took us all by surprise, and walked through an actual war zone. Aside from, we've just been talking about the logistics of it, the idea that an American president would take that personal risk is really something. And I think that's partly why you're seeing the outrage that you're seeing from Putin, who doesn't go anywhere without being in a cocoon of guards and armored trains and cars, and also here in the United States for Biden's opponents. I mean, this was the Joe Biden that's not supposed to exist. This very active and vital guy taking on a punishing schedule. I mean, I got tired just thinking. I've done some overseas trips with politicians. I got tired just thinking about the schedule. And so, Biden, I think, really surprised a lot of people on both sides of the Atlantic. And I think he's right that NATO has never been stronger. And it's a remarkable turnaround for an alliance that, just 10 years ago was thinking about what its role in the world was supposed to be.
10 years ago, I'm not sure I would have been in support of continuing NATO? Honestly, I don't know. It wasn't even on my radar at the time. But in that context, yeah, it seemed to be an outdated organization 10 years ago from even my limited understanding at the time and my understanding now of politics at the time. It appeared to be an outdated organization, but man, apparently a group of allied countries saying we will not invade each other and we will protect each other if we get invaded. Yeah, apparently a union against invasion is an important thing to keep around. It would seem.
Yeah, and we need to underline this fact, Tom. You and I both former members of the Republican Party. Before I criticize members of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell and most Republicans in the United States Senate have been traditional, taken at the traditional stand of Republicans. They've stood shoulder to shoulder with Joe Biden in our defense of freedom. But you look at, like, for instance, Ron DeSantis, who actually went on Fox News yesterday and said that Putin doesn't really pose a risk to his neighbors. And it's absolutely painful.
Eye-watering.
It's absolutely painful, especially a guy who wants to take control of a party that Ronald Reagan once led and went to the Brandenburg Gate and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." What a way to devolve for a party.
Ron DeSantis and other Republicans don't want this next election, or really anything, to be about foreign policy. It's their
true. But also bear in mind, if they put out any foreign policy, it's going to be pro-Russia. The MAGA folks. There's a lot of folks that say we shouldn't differentiate between MAGA and Republicans. There is a difference. And I am not even, it's going to be real hard for me to say this. All right, hold on 1 second. I am on the side of Republicans. Yeah, no, in all seriousness, I'm on the side of Republicans when it comes to differentiating between MAGA and Republicans on this issue. Just like I say I'm on the side of MAGA when it comes to a lot of the U.S. oligarchy issues, traditional Republicans still understand that on the world stage, Russia's not a friend. In this current climate, we don't really have enemies in the traditional sense. What are we going to do? Go to war with these countries? No, we're not. Once you get to a certain point in terms of economics, in terms of military power, the only reasonable option between countries is to engage in economic war, an actual military war. It just the math doesn't work out. So Russia's not a friend, folks. As in, America will be directly harmed. As in, American interests will be directly harmed by Russia getting to stomp around and invade other countries and take them over. It's disruptive to big business as well as, decency. So Republicans will not, the traditional Republicans will not take a pro-Russia stance. No, sir. But the MAGA folks who have absolutely, first of all, no understanding of foreign policy. Second of all, a lot of them, such as George Santos, are literally in the pockets of Russian oligarchs. Still wondering where he got that $700,000 from. I'm just talking about the $28,000 donation he got from an oligarch. Yeah, we don't know where he got that $700,000 from. the traditional Republicans are not going to take that stance. By the way, real important that Trump gets indicted, gets tossed in prison, because that dude is extremely pro-Russia. That dude is responsible largely for the invasion of Ukraine by Putin. He weakened Ukraine so much by showing a wavering in America's support of that country's ability to be sovereign, ability to not be invaded, by dangling the military aid that we were obligated by decency, if nothing else, to give them, but also, our word. Trump needs to be in prison because if he's on the ticket, then suddenly Russia's, or rather Ukraine's continued support from the United States, that is on the ticket then. But if we have, and another MAGA guy, Ron DeSantis, as he's saying, if he is a serious candidate for president, then that is on the ticket. We need to get Trump in prison to eliminate one of those guys. Toot sweet.
Achilles heel. They don't know anything about it. They don't care. The base they have to deal with is actively hostile to any discussion of foreign policy. Partly, is it is that anti-Zelensky, anti-Biden reflex, but partly because the Republicans have abandoned the internationalist, the kind of muscular internationalism that Reagan brought to the end of the Cold War, and adopted a kind of sour know-nothingism about foreign policy. And those are the primary voters. And this is, I think, why you're seeing the House being, the House members somewhat difficult, more difficult than the Senate members, because that's the very core of the GOP base. Those are the primary voters that they have to get past. And those voters don't want to hear anything about foreign policy or NATO or Ukraine or Zelensky because they watch a lot of TV. And they don't know much more else.
Yeah. Jim.
Hagar, I wanted to ask you, too, you've worked so much on sanctions policy in the past in all of your different jobs. We haven't spent a lot of time recently talking about whether this could all fall apart. Because remember, in the beginning, it was like, oh, countries won't come together on this. They will not do the same level of sanctions. What's your assessment looking at this on what the challenges may be for the Treasury Department, a place where you spent some time?
Sure. Well, sanctions, as a rule, they take time to work. And that's the case with anything, right? When we think about Iran, for example, and when we got to those negotiations, it took years of those sanctions working, undermining their oil proceeds, bringing Iran to its knees to the negotiating table. And so with Russia, when you're talking about the advanced, heavy sanctions that you have now, they've only been in place for a year. You've had sanctions since 2014. You and I both worked on them when we were in government together. But they're very different now. They are very forceful. I will note that the Treasury Deputy Secretary Wally Adeyemo, a friend of mine, is speaking today at the Council on Foreign Relations, where he will talk about the latest in the effect of sanctions. What I've seen is that he will be saying that due to sanctions, the U.S. and from the West, Russia has lost 9,000 pieces of military equipment. 50% of their tanks are down. So there is a real cause and effect here when it comes to sanctions. But as a rule, and this is the case for everything, sanctions are one piece of a foreign policy strategy.
Okay, I did just want to say, I'm sorry to freeze you there.
They're not.
I did want to say, with the caveat that I honestly, I don't have as good an understanding of this to say I am 100% never going to change my opinion on this. But thus far, I have been for 100% sanctions, as in do zero business, goose egg business with Russia until it's over. Perhaps, now I can't think of an exception. Maybe, and again, this comes down to my understanding not being full enough of how the oil situation works in terms of military reserves. But perhaps with the exception of like only buying oil from them, if that were, I mean, I don't think they're going to, doesn't matter. Point being, I'm for, turn of phrase here, stepping on the gas as much as possible with sanctions, because you can do an infinite amount of sanctions without firing a bullet, and nobody has to get killed, and you are severely punishing a country.
Not the silver bullet in achieving a national security objective. They work when coupled with diplomatic efforts, military efforts, humanitarian efforts, whatever it might be. And in this case, and given especially Biden's announcement in Ukraine to expect additional sanctions against Russia sanctions evaders and other elements that support its military, I would expect all of that to ramp up even further this year.
I mean, just fantastic news. I'm proud of Biden for that one. You can bet I'm going to be ragging on him again soon for the train disaster in Ohio with Norfolk Southern. But I got to give the credit where it is due. This trip to Ukraine, it was good. It was good of him to do. It was a good show of solidarity. I've said my piece on Ukraine. You know how I feel. Boot those Russian bastards out. There is no justification for their invasion. It's an attempt at like 1800s style, early 1900s style colonialism. That's all it is. What can you do? Oh boy, there's a lot. Link in the description. There's a bunch. There's a link to U.S. Vetted Ukrainian aid organizations. So if you want to aid Ukraine directly, you can. There is, I mean, think about how harsh the winter was in Texas for those people that lost their power for a span that can be measured in days. Now imagine that Texas was getting shelled constantly, and you have what Ukraine was dealing with. Help in any way you can. If you want to feel better about the state of the world, do something about it. I would recommend picking one of those aid organizations. If you have some spare cash, donate to them. If you have supplies they may need, send them to them. But kudos to good old Dark Brandon for going overseas and showing some solidarity. I think we should as well.